Hi, this is Ashish from developerhut.net and welcome to the second session of in-hut development series. So in this session, we'll be going to create an administrative portal with the Spring Security. So let's see how this application will look like. So we have a very simple login page where we will be logging with some username and password, and we will be able to see some user information. User will be able to log out and navigate with the different kind of menus. Here different user also have access to different menus as well. So each user has a different access. For example, this user is administrative role, so he has access to all the menus. However, the other user may be of a different role and he may have the limited access. So let's see and start developing this application. So let's start with creating very simple Spring project with a Spring initializer. So project will be of Maven type, language will be of Java. We will be using Spring Boot version 3.3.4. Let's add the group ID and I will say com dot developer hut dot in hut development in hut dev. Okay, so this is what will be the group ID. Then artifact will be, let's say, admin portal with security. Okay, and let's keep the package name bit smaller. So I will keep it as com.developerhut.inhutdev. Packaging will be of jar type and Java version will be of 70. Right now, the dependencies we will be needing the web dependencies as this is the web project. Then we also required the security, Spring Security. So I will say Spring Security, right? Then we will also require the Thymeleaf dependency because we will be going to show the some pages, HTML pages. That is definitely we want. And let's also add the DevTools dependency, Spring Boot DevTools. This is used for to for faster developments. We'll be see those during this application development. So let's explore. Let's see the form.xml. So we have group ID com.developerhut.inhutdev. Artifact is admin portal with Spring Security, and we added the Spring Security, Thymeleaf, the web dependency, and the dev tools. Okay, so let's create the project. So I have imported the project into the Eclipse. Now, if you see, we have a form.xml which we already saw. Now let's start adding some controllers in this project, right? So we have the admin portal with security application.java, which is a main file. Now let's create one controller. Let's say I will say class, and I will say login controller. I will put this in controller package controller, right? And let's say finish. So the first thing, let's add at the rate controller annotation. So controller, right? Then next we will add some index page and then the login page. Okay. So let's say I will say public string and index. So index page will be by default accessible without any authentication. That is the intent of the intent of adding the index page. So I will say return, I will say index. Okay, so there will be index.html. So yep, let's add the get mapping. So at the rate get mapping, and we will say value, right? And I will say if it's a slash or it's a index. So in the both way we can access the index page, right? Now let's add the index.html. So let's go to the resources and template. Let's say new. I will say file and I will say index.html. right? So this will be index.html. Let me copy paste the default template which I have. So let me paste the template which I have copied. So this is the default index.html content which I added in index.html. This contains some, the title, some messages, and a link to the login page as well, right? Now let's go ahead and create the login mapping. So I will simply just copy this, and I will say instead of index, I will say login, right? And let me copy and paste it, and we will require this login, okay, instead of this. Okay, so we will have a login mapping as well. Now let's create login.html. So I'll simply say new file, which is login.html. Let me copy paste the login content. Let me paste the login content here. I will save this. So here I have added the login content along with the Thymeleaf, all the required dependencies. Okay, you can copy all this template from my GitHub repository project, or you can create your simple form without, any CSS. This both the HTML and login.html forms or the pages has some predefined CSS I added in this. Okay, you can also create very simple form without CSS by your own, or you can use this just for, so that it will display uh, good while doing the development. Okay, so this login page will contain, simple form which will take a username and the password, and we have a login button. Okay, and this action will be, of course, this form will be posted to the login URL. Now next is, let's create the web security config so that we can configure all our pages or all our URL. So I will create a class. I will say web security config. Okay, of course this class is special class. We require configuration annotation so that we can load this class during startup, right? This class will be also annotated with the web security, right? So I will say enable web security, right? So this particular class will be showing that it contains some security related information. I will just rename this, we'll say web security and config. Okay, so yeah, now let's create a very simple bean. So I will say bean and create one method, public security filter chain, a method which will return the security filter chain, of course, right? I will say security filter chain which will take the HTTP security. Okay, so I will say HTTP, and this will of course return security filter chain. So I will say HTTP dot build. Okay, which will definitely return, right? Let's also add the exception in the throws declaration, and let's save this. Now let's add our mapping. So the first thing which we need to add is HTTP and authorize request, right? So authorize HTTP request, right? So we'll say request, and we'll add our lambda expression, right? And I will say request dot request method, right? So these are the methods. So the first is of course slash, then we have the index.html or index slash index and the login, right? So whenever these mappings are called on the application, we don't want to perform any kind of authentication, right? So we will simply say permit all, right? So permit all. However, if there is any other request coming apart from all of this, those has to be authenticated. Okay, right? So this is a very simple form that we have created. Next is, of course, we required the form, right? Login, of course, we need to make some provisions. So I will say form login. right? And we will say I will say form, again add the lambda expression, and I will say form dot login page, the login page which I have, which we have created, right, with the login mapping, right? And of course, this has to be, we already added the parameter, so we don't require to add it again here. However, we need to define the login page, right? Uh, then let's add, okay, let's still add those, we'll say the parameter, right? So that there won't be any chance of, errors afterwards. Then last and most important is the logout, right? So also add logout, I will say logout, and logout should also be, permitted, right, without any authentication, right? This is how we configure our security filter chain, right, in a very simple way. Now, next is let's add, a simple users so that we can log in with all these users into the application, right? So I will create one again, very simple bean method, right? So I will say bean, I will say public, and this method will return the user details service, right? So user details service, let's import this, and I will say user details service, right? And next is let's create some user detail service. So we'll create user details, right? I will say user one, okay, and we'll use the user of a Spring, right? So org Spring Framework Security Core User Details. So we will create first user with very default password encoder. We will add separate password encoder later, okay? Then let's create each with username, and I will say here username will be user first, okay? Then we'll add password, right? So password will be, let's say, password, and last is roles. So role will be of this user, okay? And last is let's build this object, okay? So this is the first, user which we have created. Let's copy this. Let's create one more user with different role and different username and password. So I will say user 2, and I will say this is the admin user, okay? And I will change the role. I will say this is the admin, right? Now let's add both these users in our in-memory database, right? So I will say return new in memory user details manager, okay? And we will add both users. So I will say user, sorry, I will say user 1 comma user 2, right? So we have our users ready, default users with default password, and each user have their different roles associated with it. Now next is let's create some welcome page, right? So I will simply go here, and I will say copy this one, and I will say instead of login I will say welcome, okay? So this is the welcome page. Once user is successfully logged in, he will be routed to the welcome page, okay? With maybe we can also add some messages later over here, but that we will do it after some time, okay? So let's create a welcome.html. So I will just go to the source template, and I will say file, and I will say welcome.html, okay? Let me copy paste the predefined template which I have. So let me paste the content. So here in this welcome page, we will be adding some user-friendly message. Plus, we also have a logout button, which will be logging out the user. Okay. So let's also add this welcome page as a default success URL, right? So I will go to the security config, and I will add say default success URL, right? Which will be slash welcome, right? So whenever a user logged in successfully, he will be default landed to the welcome.html or welcome page, okay? So now let's go ahead and try to run this application. So our application is started. Let's go to the browser. Let's say http://localhost, and I will first go to the index page. So let's see. So this is our default index page which I have created earlier, right? And let's go to the login. We have a login link. We'll go to the login, and we will add our username and password. So I will say user and password, and let's try to log in. Yeah, so we are able to log in to the application. So as we are seeing the welcome URL. Right? Let's try to log out, and let's try to access the welcome directly. So I will say welcome and enter. It is routed to the login page, right? So let's try to log in with admin user. So let's say login, and yeah, we are able to access the welcome. Okay. So as of now, we have created very simple login form. We created some users and we are able to log in into the application. So currently we are using the in-memory database to store our user information. Now, let's say if we want to use our own database or our own repository, in that case, we need to create some other provisions, right? So let's see those how we can use our own repository, right? So currently, all the users which we have created are present in the in-memory user details manager or user details service object, right? Which is Spring internal in-memory management. So we can use our own database like MySQL or Oracle or any other repository that we have. So let's see how we can do that. So first I will simply comment this section. So instead of this, I will just copy this once again, right? And we will create a new one, right? So we will create again the same method. However, we will be returning the different class this time, which is our own class. So I will say new uh, custom uh, user detail service, right? So this is the class which we are going to create. So let's create this class. So I will say for one, and I will create this class in, let's say, service package, right? Which is custom user detail service, right? And I will say click on finish, and yeah, so we have a class which is, uh, which implements the user detail service interface, right? And which by default we have one method which is load by username, which will take a username as an argument, right? Here we can write our own logic where we will get the users and we will, you know, um, pass this user information to the Spring framework while login, right? Now, we will again we require the same user details, so I will just simply copy this section and put it over here, right? So what I will do, I will just do this, right? And next is we can simply, let's say, we will use I will say only a user, right? And we will simply pass this user single information, right? Because anyway, once user is logged in, there will be only one user who is going to log in into this portal, right? So I will say, sorry, this should be user only, right? Which is core details, right? And all these details which are hard coded as of now will be, we will change this. So what we will do, we want all these details to be come from certain repository, right? So for this, let's create one more, one more class, right? So I will create one user class in another package. So I will say user, okay, which will be, let's say, in entity package, right? And here we will simply say private string username, right? Then private string password, okay, and private string role, okay. So these are the three the instance variable that we have. Let's create a getter setter, and we will also create one, the constructor, overloaded constructor. Okay, so I have created the getter setters, and let's create one constructor as well using fields. So I will say constructor using fields, and yeah, so this will use to create the object. Then next is, let's create some repository where we can store all these users, right? So I will just simply create one more class. Let's say user repository, okay, which will be, let's say, in a repository interface, okay. Repository, okay, in a repository package, right? And we will simply create one map. So I will say public static uh, map, right? Which will take a string as a key and user as a value, right? User, which is of course our entity, package user, which we created. I will say this is user map. This map will hold all the users information. Okay, and I will create the object right away. So I will say hash map. Okay, and we need to add some users. So I will say public, I will say void, and create, um, let's say, users, right? So this method is responsible for filling up this hash map, right? So I will create some users. I will say user, um, let's say user1 is equal to new user, right? So I will simply say, let's say John, right? And password will be password, right? Password, and role will be, let's say, admin. Okay, this is the first user that which we required. Next is, let's get one more user. I will say user2, and I will say Jessica. Okay, password and role will be different, so I will say user, and let's put both this user in user map. So user map dot put, and we will just add, the key will be of course with the username. Okay, so I will say get username, okay, and user1, right? Let's copy this, and we will simply say user2, which will be of course Jessica, and we'll store the user2 object, right? Now we want this method to be called, while application startup, right? So the first annotation which we need to add is configuration, okay, so that this class will be loaded during startup. And if you want this method to invoke at the startup, you also need to add one more annotation. So I will say post construct. Okay, so this is the most important annotation. First is a configuration, and another is the post construct. So once the application is fully started, it will automatically invoke this method, where we will be creating some users and put it in this map. This is just a temporary provision. Instead of connecting to MySQL or Oracle, I prefer to go ahead with this to just show this example. Okay, so we have some kind of a local repository which will act as a database for us, right? Now, next is, let's go to our custom user detail service class, and let's add our business logic, right? So once user logged in, he will, Spring framework will call this method automatically, right? And we will get the username, whatever the username that user entered from the, the HTML page, right? So we will find that user and get the user object, and then we will add these details accordingly. So very simple how we can achieve this. So the first thing that which we need to do is, I will say a user repository, right? We have a user map, right? User map dot get, right? And we have a username. So this is how we will get the user object. Let's store this in local variable, right? And yeah, so we have this one, this user, right? And let's also check whether this, if this information is, this object is null, then in that case we need to return the null value, right? So I will say if user is equal to null, then in that case we won't fill this object, right? So instead we return null from here, and this method will be closed. In another case, I will say user details, right? And I will just return the user details here, right? And here, instead of hard coding, we will just simply say user dot get username, right? Then user dot get password and user dot get role, right? So now every time user logged in, it will, the value will be picked up from here, and we will push that user back to the user details. Okay, so this is how it will work. We can simply also add one sysout statement over here to check which which user is trying to log in, right? So I will just simply say uh, received received let's say login request from this particular user, right? Okay, so that we understand whether we are getting the request to this class or not, right? So we have all the details available, and let's save this. So I'll just close this. We don't need this as of now. So what we have created, we created the user detail service, a custom user detail service class, right? And where we load user by username, and we add our business logic, right? uh, let's see if this is working or not. So I will just simply run this project. So our project is started. Let's go to the browser, and I will say login, and let's try to log in with John, and I will say password. Okay, and yeah, we're able to log in successfully. Let's see our uh, the messages come or not. And here, if you go on a console, yeah, you can see received login request from John, right? So we got the execution in this method. We successfully got the user, and we pushed that user to the user data, and this is passed back to the Spring framework, and then we able to log them, right? This is how you can create a custom user detail service, your own uh, user detail service or login kind of a framework inside Spring. Okay, so we are not using in-memory database. Now we are using our own repository. Now, let's say if you want to use some encryption technique for your password, right? So all these passwords should not be in the clear text format in the your database, or maybe inside your repository, or maybe you want to encrypt this password in a middle way, right? So how we can achieve that? It's very simple. So what we'll be going to use is, we will use a Spring framework some password encoder, which is bcrypt password encoder. Okay, that's we will be going to use, and we will see how we can implement this. So let's create one bean method again. So I will say bean, I will say public, and I will say password encoder. So this method will return the password encoder, and I will say password encoder, and I will simply say return the crypt password encoder. Okay, this is the simple method that we have. So now let me stop this. So bcrypt password encoder, let's import this. And oh, sorry, I forgot new keyword. Okay, yeah. So this is, so we have created password encoder, right? Now next is, we have to tell our Spring framework that we are using this password encoder, right? So for that, there is one more method we need to create, or simply we can say we need to configure the authentication manager. We need to tell Spring framework that we are using this custom user detail service and this particular password encoder. Okay, so for that we need to configure authentication manager. So let's create one more bean. So I will say bean, I will say public, and authentication manager, authentication manager, right? And I will say authentication manager, right? This method will take the parameter of type HTTP security again, okay, same as a security filter chain, right? And let's create, let's create one more object, which is DAO authentication provider. Okay, this is something which we need to create. So I will say authentication provider is equal to new DAO authentication provider, and just simply, set these two variables, or just simply set this to, custom classes which we have created, the user detail service and password encoder. So I will say authentication manager dot set user, sorry, set user detail service, right? In our case, it will be, let's call our method user detail service, right? And next is I will say authentication manager, authentication provider dot set password encoder, right? Which is in our case is password encoder method, okay? And just return this. So return, I will say new uh, provider manager, and in our case it is authentication provider, okay? So what this method will do, it will simply, you know pro convert this DAO authentication provider. So basically what this method will do, it will create a DAO authentication provider. We will set our user details service and password encoder, and we will push it back to the provider manager, right? Now one more thing which we need to do is, whatever the custom user service we have created, there we are storing the password in plain text format. So this is something we need to change, right? So we need to encode our password before we pass it to this user detail object. Otherwise, our password won't be matched with the whatever the password which is entered by the user from the HTML page, right? So let's auto-wire our password encoder. So I will say at the rate auto-wire. I will say private. I will say password encoder and password encoder, right? And just simply encode this password. So I will say password dot encode. Okay. So what it will do, it will simply encode this clear text password, and then we will pass it to user details. So that encoded password will be available in this object, and whatever the password which is coming from the HTML page, that will also be encoded, because we already told that it should be encoded with this password encoder, which is decrypt password encoder. And the same way we also have, this will also encrypt the password or encode the password in decrypt format, right? Now let's try to run this application and see whether it is working or not. So our application is started. Now let's go ahead and so we have John and Jessica, right? So let's go here and let me refresh this. So we'll go here and I will say John, and I will say password. Okay, and okay, we are getting error, and let's try to password. Yeah, so there is something wrong. Let's see. So we need to remove the default password encoder, because we are not using the default password. So instead we will use the builder, right? And let's try to save this and let's try to run this again. Okay, this is started. So let me change this. So instead of user, I will simply just rename this. I will say logged in user, right? So this is logged in user, right? And let's try to run this application. So application is started. Now let's go here and access the page again, and let's try to log in with John password. Okay, and yeah, so we are able to log in now, right? So even if you try to log in with other Jessica, it will still work, right? So this is what we did. So we remove the default password encoder, which anyway not required because we are using our own password in provider, right? So you can also use your own password encoder if you want. The same way, I have provided both the, I have shown you the both the ways, right? Either you can use Spring utility classes, or you can create your own classes as well, right? Same as a custom user detail service, you can create your own password encoder and you can return that password encoder and pass it to the DAO authentication provider, plus use it in your custom user detail service class. Okay, so this is how we, you know, I use the password encoder here as well. So as of now, we are able to successfully log into the portal and we are able to get the welcome page. However, we are not showing any additional information on the, welcome page. So let's try to add some more information on the page. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll quickly go to our login controller where we are showing the welcome page. And what we'll do, we will add, uh, at the rate authentication principle. So I will say uh, this is the annotation which we required, authentication principle, and we will get our user details, right? So I will say user details, right? So if you remember correctly, we are adding the user details from our custom user detail service, right? So what are the user details? We are getting the user details from the user repository and creating the object of the user details, and then we are building that object and sending it to Spring Framework. We can retrieve this object from the Spring Framework back once we logged in successfully. So this annotation will give that object and we can use this object here, right? So what we can simply do here is I will say user details, right? Get we will get simply get the username, right? And what I will do is I will simply extract this and just test out this. So I will say user name, or what I will do is I will just simply, sorry, I will just do it like this, username. I will say logged in successfully, right? So this is the message that I just want to display. I just wanted to see whether we are getting the this object or not. Okay, so let's see and let's try to uh, test this. So application started. Let's go and I will just refresh this and I will try to log in with John. I will say password and we're logged in. Let's go to console and yeah, you can see we're getting the object values successfully, right? Now let's try to add more information on this page. Very simple. How we can achieve this is let's go ahead, and what I will do is I will add some more information in the user object. So what we'll do is we will go to entity, we'll go to user, okay, and here I will add some more information. So I will say first name, and then I will say last name, and we can also do something like this, last login time. Okay, so we have this object, right, and we'll update our constructor. So I will simply remove this and I will add constructor again with all these fields, right? And let's save this. Let's also create a getter setter. These are important. So I will say getter setter for all the methods, right? Let's save this. Let's go to the user repository and add all the other details. For example, I will say first name will be of John, right? And then I will say Doe is last name, and we will simply say local local date. I will say local date time,
dot now. Okay, this is the time that I wanted to show, and I will just say toString. Okay, same way for username Jessica also. So I will say Jessica, right? And I will say Thompson, and the same way I will say local date time dot now dot toString. Okay. Now we have both the users ready in a user repository, and we have added first name and last name. Now let's go and try to fetch these details from user repository. So it's very simple. We have user repository, right? Dot user map dot get. So this way we can get our user object, right? And once we get our user object, it's very easy for us to, you know, set this entire user object or particular fields back to the HTML page or a welcome page, right? Now we have a user object in place. Now how to send this details to the welcome page? For that we just use the model object, right? So I will say model, and it should be Spring Framework UI, okay? And I will say model, right? And let's add this. I will say model dot add attribute, right? And I will say I just want to make first name, okay? And I will say user dot get first name, okay? And then let's copy this and let's do same for the last name. I will say last name, and here I will say last name, right? Um, Now we set the attribute. Now let's retrieve those attribute on the welcome page. Let's go to the welcome page, and here we say instead of a user, we will just use the Thymeleaf syntax over here. Okay. Um, so what we can do is I will say span. Okay. Span, and we use a Thymeleaf, which is th dot text colon text. Okay. So this way, you can set the text to the span element, okay? And how to access the first name? The syntax is like this, okay? So it's the first name, the name of the attribute which we have set, okay? And the same way, we can I'll just copy this. I will make a space, and I will say last name. Let's see if it is working or not. I will just start the application. So our application is started. Now let's test this. We'll just log out, and I will say John. I will say password. Let's log in, and you can see we are getting first name and last name. Okay. Let's try to log in with Jessica with different user. I will say password and login. So you can access the first name and last name on the page, right? Now let's try to add entire user object as well. We can also do that. So it's very simple. Uh, I will just simply say model dot add attribute, and here I will say entire user, right? And I will just set the user object over here. Okay. Now, once you set the user object, you can simply access this user object on the welcome page. Okay. So here, what I will do is I will say last login time is, and we'll just simply say span. Okay, we'll just add this. Now how you can add this, how you can access the user, it's very simple. We will just say our attribute name, which is in our case is a user, right? So if you go to login controller, we add the attribute as name as a user, right? And we will use our variable name, which is last login time. Okay, so I will say dot last login type. Okay, and let me add one more here. I will add one line break. Okay, so it will look good. Now let's try to test this. So I will say, so application is started. Now let's go back, and I will refresh this, and I will say John, and I will say password. Okay, so we are able to access the user object as well. So this is how we can intercept our welcome page, and we can add the user details, whatever the user details that we want, that we can add it over here.
So as of now, we are able to log in into the system, and we are also able to show the user specific information on the welcome page. Now let's add more details on this welcome page. What we'll be going to do is we will be adding more menus on the welcome page, and we will access those pages through that menu. Okay, so let's go to the welcome page, and I will create very simple links. So I will say, let's say ul an ordered list, right? And include li, and I will say this li tag, I will say there are two menus I am trying to create. So the first is let's say a user menu, which will show the list of the user, right? And next is, let me copy this. Next is, let's say, post, okay, which will show the list of all the posts which is posted by the user. Okay. Okay, let me stop this. So I will add the link. So link will be of th, and we'll say href. Okay, and I will give some, you know, the link. So user, right, should be like in curly braces, right, and copy the same, and I will say instead of user I will say post. Okay, so these are the two menus which I have created now. Okay, now next is, let's work on the user part. So what I will do, I will go to the login controller, and I will create one more mapping. I will just simply copy this and paste it. I will say this is a user. Okay, change the method name, which is user, and I will return the user.html, right? I won't be needing this, but if you want, you can anyway use this. Okay. So what I will do, I will keep this as it is. However, I want the user list to be shown on the portal on or this page, right? So what we will do is, I will just simply get all the user list. So instead of user, I will simply copy this, just paste it, and I will say user list, right? So I will go here and say user list, and I will say this is my list, right? So user map. So I will just simply get user map dot let's say string, or user map dot values dot to list, or I say as it should be, it's a collection of course, and dot stream dot let's say to list, right? So there are multiple ways to do this. So what I did is I simply added a user list attribute, and I added the list of all the users, right? Now let's go ahead and create a user.html. So I will just go here to the main resources template, and I will create user.html. So I will say user.html. Okay, I will just simply copy the content of welcome.html. This best. Okay, instead of welcome page, I will say user. This is user page. I will keep this part as it is, right? Now let's show the all the user information. So I will simply copy paste the template which I have. So I will simply add the table. Okay, so I have a table with all the information, and this is how we are going to iterate the list, which is, in our case, our attribute is user list, and we will iterate this with the each element or loop, and it will just print all the details for that user. It will create, every time it will create a new row. Okay, so this is, I hope this is self-explanatory. So let's try to run this. So our portal is started. Let's go to the browser and I will just log out and I will just log in with John. So log in and we have menu, user and post. Let's go to user and if there is some issue, we are not able to get all the information. Okay, so there is a small typo mistake. L is capital. So let's try this again. Let's go and I'll just simply refresh this. We are able to get all the information, right? So this is the user page or user screen which we have created. Similarly, I will also create the post. So to save some time, I have already created the post screen related changes. I will quickly walk you through those changes. So I have created a post entity which contains some attributes like ID, username, title and description, constructor and the data setter. Similarly, I have created the post repository, which is actually filling up all the post related information by default to the postman. Okay, so these are the few posts which is created by some of the users, and this is a kind of information which we are going to show it on a post.html or post screen. Okay, so similarly, I also created the post.html, which is similar to user.html. The only thing is instead of showing the user information, it will show the post information. And I also added the menus like user or post. The menu links are available on this page. Now let's try to run the project and see if it's working or not. So our project is started. Let's see. So we have a welcome page. Let's go to the post. And yeah, we are able to see the post, right? And we get all the details, right? Don't worry about this information which is not coming. We can correct this later, and we have other links as well. So we can go to the user page. From user we can go to the post, and then we can also come back to our welcome page as well, right? So now till now we have added all the menus, and now next is we will be assigning these menus to particular role. So let's see this in the next section. So now we have added the menus on the welcome page. Now what we want is we want to segregate these menus as per the user role. So for example, if user is an admin type of user, he should be able to view all the screen. However, if user is other than admin, he should be able to see only specific screen. Okay, so for that we have certain kind of flexibility in a Spring that we can use it, and we will see how we can do that. So if you see the carefully in our custom user details service class, where we are creating the user details object, right? And we are passing the rules, right? So if you see the rules method carefully, so basically it will take the array of a string, right? Where we can set a different kind of permission we can set for this particular role section, right? Now if we see where we are creating the users, we are assigning some specific role, right? So for example, John is an admin and Jessica is a normal user role, right? So what I want is I want admin. If my user is admin, then he should be able to access all the screen. However, if a user is only a type of a user role, then it should have only post screen should be available to him. Okay, so how we can achieve that? It's a very simple. So for that, what we will do is we will create certain changes into the system. So the first is, let's say we have a role, right? So a role is of admin. Now let's create some permission. So what I will say, private string, which is again an array. Okay, and I will say screen permission. Okay, very simple. And what I will do is I will create a getter setter. Let's say generate. So our getter setters are generated. Now here we will simply see and allocate all the row screen permission. So I will say if let's say admin, right? So admin is equals, if this particular user is of admin role, then in that case I want to assign certain screen permission, right? Else in other case, if it's a type of a user, right, I will just simply copy this once again, paste it, right? So instead of admin, I will say give it a type of a user, right? So now if it's a admin, then we will say this dot set screen permission. Then in that case, I will say new string, which is of array type, and we will simply pass the screen name. For example, user screen should be accessible and post screen should be accessible to this, right? In the other case, I will just simply remove the user screen. So only post screen is available for a user type of role. Okay. Now we will simply go to a custom user detail service, and instead of get role, I will simply pass the permission over here. So I would say get screen permission. So whenever admin is logged in, he will get user plus the post, which is what we have set over here. In case of user, it will only be the post thing, right? Now let's go to the welcome screen. So here we need to define when we should show this kind of a menu, right? So for that we have one more tag which we need to define in a Thymeleaf, which is a security tag. Okay, so I have already added it over here. Okay, so security. Now how we can utilize this? Very simple. In the li tag, we will simply say security colon authorize. So authorize is equal to, and I will say has rule, right? If this particular has rule, this is basically our screen name, right? Which we have added here, right? So if it's a user, if this is available, then and only then show this, right? Then and only then Thymeleaf will process this time. Otherwise, it won't process this time. And in other case, we will simply, I just copy this. I will just paste it over here, right? And here I will say if post is screen is available, then in that case, we should Thymeleaf should process this, right? Now let's test this. So I will start the application. So application is started. Let's go to the browser, simply refresh this, say John, which is admin, and I will say password. Okay. So we are able to see both the menus, right? Now let's log in with Jessica, say password, right? And we can only see the post, right? So this is how we can show hide the menu. There is one more thing. If you see here, we haven't added the security section in this post page, that we will add it anyway later. However, if you see, if I try to access this, I am still able to access this, right? However, if you say this, we said that for user type of a role, only post should be allowed, not user screen should not be allowed. So this is something which we need to add some check over here, right? Now let's try to do that part in the next section. So I have made a couple of changes in the application. We are now displaying the role on the welcome screen, as well as I have also added the menus with security tag in the user as well as the post page. Now let's proceed ahead to solve our problem, as we are still able to access that page which is not assigned to that particular user, right? So how to achieve that? So let's go ahead and so let's try to log in with that user. Let's say Jessica, and that's a password, right? And now Jessica is only able to see the post menu. However, if she tries to access the user, right, is still able to access the user screen, which should not be happening. But why this is happening? Because in the controller, right, whenever we are accessing the controller, this mapping is still she is able to access, right? Even if we hide the menu with the security tag, it is still not sufficient that we should access that particular mapping, right? So we need to stop this mapping itself, like this, right? So for that, there are certain changes we need to make. Let's see what are those. The first thing we need to do is we need to enable the method level security, right? So this is the method which is accessible, which is linked to this particular mapping. Now, how we can stop this? So let's go to our, let's say, web security config class, right? And I will simply add one annotation at the rate enable method security. This is the first annotation we need to add. Next is we need to add one more annotation to the method as well, right? Which is same as the security has rule, right? Which we added in a welcome and the other pages. So the annotation we need to add is at the rate pre-authorized, right? So pre-authorized annotation, and we will also tell what that particular annotation should, authorized, right? So I will say has a role, and we will add our role name or that particular screen permission, which is, let's say, user, right? So if this particular if request is coming and if it has a user screen permission which is allowed, then only then this method will be accessible, right? In the post case, I will simply go here and I will also add the post, right? So the post, right? Now we added the annotation. Okay, now let's try to run and test this. So our application started. Let's go to the browser. I will just refresh this first. uh, let's go to the login. Just log out. Let's try to log in with Jessica. I will say password. Okay, we are able to access the post. Now let's try to access the user and let's see what happens. Okay, so if you see here, you can see there is a authorization denied exception and access denied. So as Jessica is not having the user screen access, she won't be able to access this now because we already added the method level security. Now, next is we saw the exception, right? However, we don't want this exception to be thrown or shown on the screen. However, instead of that, we want some custom page. So in the next section, we will see how we can show a custom page or some user-friendly message on a screen, how we can do that. That we will see in the next section. So now let's see how we can handle this access denied exception, which is coming on the screen. So it's very simple. Let's go and see how we can do this. The first thing which we need to do is we need to create one bean method which will handle this exception, right? So I will simply go to the web security config and we will create one bean method. So I say at bean and I say public, and this should return the access denied handler. Okay, and I will say access denied handler, no parameter, right? And I will simply create a new class. I will say return new custom access denied handler. Okay, so let's create this class. I will say create this class. I will create this in service package. So service, and I will click on finish. So we have custom access denied handler which implements the access denied handler interface, and we already have a handle method overridden, right? Now what we will do here is we will very simply say we have already got the exception here, right? So what I will do is I will just simply print the stack trace. I will say print stack trace. Here we can also add some message. Let's say sysout, and I will say user price user price to access unauthorized URL. Okay, this is the message which will be printed, right? Now next is once we have this, we need to configure this custom access denied handler object somewhere else, right? So where to configure this? Very simple. Let's go to our web security config and we will configure it in our security filter chain, right? So I will simply go here and I will say exception handling, right? And I will say exception uh, handling configurer. Configurer. This is the object. Let's add our lambda expression, right? And I will simply just set this. I will say configurer and dot access denied handler. Okay, we will simply call our method access denied handler, right? So this is how we will set the access denied handler, right, in the security filter chain. Now let's try to run and test this. So our application started. Let's go say login. We'll log in with Jessica. I will say password, right? We able to access the post, but let's try to access the user. Let's see what happens. So as of now, the exception on the screen is gone. Let's go to the console and we can see that we got a stack trace plus our message. User tries to access unauthorized URL, right? So this is how we can manage our access denied exception in the application. Now, instead of this blank page, we can show our custom page, right? So let's create new custom page. So I will simply go and I will create one page. So I will say access denied dot html, right? I will simply copy the content of welcome and I will go here, we'll paste it. I will simply update this. So I'll say access denied, right? And here, instead of all of this, I will just simply say unauthorized access, right? This is the message, and I will remove everything else and only give logout, right? Logout button will be as it is, and I will remove this as well, right? Will only give one, which is, let's say I will just remove this as well. We don't need this, and I will say let's go to welcome page, right? Let's remove this as well. So this is the page that we wanted to show. Now how we can do this? Let me stop the application. Now we have a page. Now we just need to configure this. So very simple. Let's go to our custom access denied handler. We know this method is already called, right? We just need to redirect our response to access denied.html, right? So very simple. We have HTTP servlet response, right? So I will simply go here and response.send redirect, right? And I will give access denied. Okay, I'll save this. We forgot to add the mapping for this, right? So let's go to the login controller and just simply create a mapping, right? So I will say I just remove this and I will say access denied, right? Let me copy this, update the method name, and simply return access denied, right? We don't need this. Let's save this. Let's try to run and test it again. So our application is started. Let's go and I will simply say login, right? And here and I will log in with Jessica and password, right? And let's try to access the user now, right? So now we are able to show some user-friendly page or a message so that it will look good, right? So in case of actual application, you should not, it's not a good practice that you should show the stack trace on the page itself, right? So instead of that, we will show some page and we will show some user friendly message, right? Here we can go back to your welcome controller, or you can provide a logout, or by default you can force user to log out automatically. That something is up to you and you can do that. So lastly, I have updated all the pages with new version of a UI. I simply added the style sheet in all the pages. You can see all the pages here, the old UI pages as well as new UI pages. The old pages are without UI. The new pages are simply with the new style sheet. If you want to use this UI, you can simply copy the style from respective page and paste it on your pages. So I hope you understand and enjoy this entire session. So all the source code is available on my GitHub repository and you can find the link in the description section. If you have any question, you can add it in the comment section below. And if you think this information is valuable, please do like and share. Thanks for watching and I will see you on the next one.